Oklahoma Gardening is a production of the Oklahoma Cooperative Extension Service as part of the land grant mission of the Division of Agricultural Sciences and Natural Resources at Oklahoma State University, dedicated to improving the quality of life of the citizens of Oklahoma through research-based information. Underwriting assistance for our program is provided by the Oklahoma Department of Agriculture, Food, and Forestry, helping to keep Oklahoma green and growing. Today on Oklahoma Gardening, we share two colorful plants you might consider adding to your garden, Campanula and Cuphea. Mike Miller with Pond Pro tells us how to deal with algae in our water garden. And finally, we take a closer look at fennel before we harvest it for Barb to make a fennel and grape salad. Today I wanted to introduce you to a little plant that's been getting a lot of attention lately in the shade garden here. This is Campanula punctata, and also known as cherry bells, this particular one, or bellflower. You can see its common name is bellflower because of this bell-shaped flower that it produces in late spring. Now this particular one is kind of this rosy pink, and actually as it kind of forms a clump in the shade garden, it sort of reminds me of foxgloves. However, it's not related to digitalis at all. But it will spread as a rhizome, or it might reseed depending on its conditions and how happy it is. Now it does like your typical average soil that is well drained, but what it really needs is more shade, especially in our Oklahoma climates, because that heat can really melt it in the summertime. So make sure to put it in shade. We have it here in our shade garden at the Botanic Garden. The other thing is it's hardy from zone 5 to 7, so we're right there in that sweet spot for its hardiness zone. Now there is a white cultivar and also a pinker cultivar. The white one is called Alba, and you can see that on campus behind the Endeavor building up at OSU. So another little gem that you might want to think about adding to your shade garden.
It's an afternoon. We're in Stillwater, but not at the Botanic Garden like we normally could be. We're at a private residence with a beautiful pond, but the homeowner thought maybe there might be some algae problems. So we're here today to talk about algae, the good, the bad, and the ugly. And there's really not too much bad about it. It's just what we think about it. So if you look down here, we've got a deep pool that really looks green, but if you hold that water up in a clear glass, you'd see that it's not. What you're looking at is the depth and the biofilm of algae that's grown all around on the rocks. This pond has a skimmer and it has a waterfall. The waterfall is really beautiful and does not have a hint of string algae that the homeowner was worried about. So she's taken a good care of taking care of that by using a granular algicide. There are lots of different products that can work on algae. We think a more natural approach is the best way. Algae is good for your pond. That's both the good and the bad. Most people think, oh, algae is bad in my pond. I can't see my fish, I can't see the rocks. It's got this ugly stuff growing all over it. I bought these rocks because they're so pretty and I want them to show up. So they get in and scrub off all of the algae and clean it all up and take care of everything, and all of a sudden it turns green again. They can't figure out why. We spend a lot of time talking about the cause of algae. You have to remember that sunlight, water, and nutrient is going to cause something to grow. And that something, in the case of this pond, are some beautiful plants. But in lots of ponds, the problem is algae. Algae is a single cell algae and the string algae that grows. Those are the two most prominent algae in Oklahoma. Be thankful you don't have the one that grows in the ocean that grows for 30 meters a day. Then you really would have a problem to worry about, and I probably couldn't help you with it. But in ponds like this in your backyard, the biggest thing you can do is be patient. And that may be the hardest thing for you to do. We find that many people expect to have a clear pond just like their swimming pool. And you're not going to be able to do that with live things in your pond. With the fish, with the bacteria, with the frogs, maybe snakes, with all the plants that you've got in there, it's an ecosystem. It all has to work together, and that's part of algae. If you think about it, early in the spring, your bacteria colony in your pond is at the very bottom. And so the fish have been asleep all winter long. They've been really slowed down, and they're beginning to release waste because in Oklahoma during February and March we start to get lots of sunshiny days. They think it's time to wake up and eat, so they release waste. That waste is fertilizer, nutrient in the water. One of the three things that you have to grow algae. You have water, you can't do away with that in your pond. You have sunlight, you're not going to have any coverage on your pond yet from plants because it's too early in the spring. They haven't started growing yet. So now you've got a low bacteria colony, high nutrient count, lots of water, some sunlight. What's going to grow? Algae. So the first algae you're probably going to see is the single cell algae that grows in the water. That's the thing that Mother Nature looks to try to resolve the issue of too much nutrient in the water. Think about it. That nutrient is fish waste. The fish waste is toxic to the fish. So she doesn't want that to harm the fish. She's going to take care of it. And one of the ways to do that is to create a plant that will eat up that nutrient out of the water, keeping the fish safe. So that's one of the biggest problems, is for you to understand that nitrogen cycle. There is a bacteria that grows in nature called Nitrosomonas that changes that nutrient, all of that waste that's growing from the fish, that changes it into less toxic nitrite. Then there's another bacteria that, again, that grows it naturally, or you can add it out of a bottle, called Nitrobacter. That bacteria changes the nitrite into nitrate. Nitrate and ammonia from the fish and water is what causes your algae to grow. If you think about that in terms of being patient, then your best option early in the spring is to wait it out. And for your benefit, I think the best way to help it get started good is to remove about 25% of the water, put fresh water in. By doing that, you're diluting the amount of nutrient in the water. Then add beneficial bacteria to help that bacteria colony grow up. Lots of different products out there available with bacteria in them. So you can get powdered bacteria or liquid bacteria. So that's a simple way to start your spring off good, is to give your pond a good cleaning, take out 25% of the water, treat it with some good bacteria, and that will give you a good head start on a great summer living the pond life.
Many of you may know that we have this program called Oklahoma Proven, and it's a program where we choose different types of plants that we know are going to be successful for you in Oklahoma, and we promote those. So it's a great educational program to let you know what's out there. There's a lot of plants that are very common, and we try to stay away from those that are real common, but sometimes there's a variety or a cultivar of those common types that deserve a lot of recognition as well. Well, today I wanted to show you our annual for 2021, and that is the plants in the genus Cuphea. These are great plants. They're actually native plants to the temperate and tropical areas of the Americas. So most of them are native to Central America and Mexico area. So they're perennial down there, but here we treat them as annuals. And as you can see, there's a wide variety. There's about 4 or 5 different species that are commonly used as bedding plants in the trade, and hybrids between, amongst those. And so there's many different cultivars that are available too. These are great plants because they love full sun, they love the heat, that's not a problem. They prefer to have moist, well-drained soils, but they're actually quite drought tolerant too. So the first one I wanted to show you, this one is a very common one, very popular type. This is a cultivar called David Verity, and it is a hybrid form between a couple of different species. This can get up to 2.5 to 3 feet high and just about as wide, so it gets nice and bushy. And if you notice, the flowers aren't really big and showy. They're really small, but the plants are just loaded with them all summer long, so they still put on a really nice display. So if you look at this one's often called cigar plant. At least one of the species that it's a hybrid from, which is Cuphea ignea. And so they're long tubular flowers, and this is actually the calyx that surrounds the petals. Some of them have petals, some of them don't have petals, or they're not very showy. But this is actually the calyx. And in this case, these are often called cigar plants because sometimes they have this nice orange or red tubular calyx, but at the tips they're kind of white and ashy and black colored, which makes them look like a cigar that's being smoked. But this is a great and a very popular variety that you can get. As you can see, we have some other types as well. This one is a pink form. This one's Starfire Pink. So there's Starfire, there's Firefly, and there's some other forms. I think that this is also a hybrid between a couple of different species. So you can see it's similar to David Verity, but it has these beautiful pinkish and purplish flowers. This one actually having a pink calyx with purplish petals that stick out at the tips. Another really cool variety, I really like this one. This is called Mexican Heather. It looks a lot like the popular plant called heather, but it's a completely different family, not related at all. And so sometimes it's called false heather as well. I like this one because it has more of a horizontal branching, horizontal growth habit to it. And it has the dark green, shiny leaves and these beautiful lavender to magenta flowers depending on the variety. So these can grow up to about 1 foot or 2 high and 2 to 3 feet wide. And there's some new cultivars that are a little more compact and only get about 10 to 15 inches high too. So these are pretty tough actually. Again, very drought tolerant. And this one can actually, not in our area, but has become a bit of a weedy problem in the Gulf Coast areas, but not a problem here because they wouldn't survive our winters. Another popular type is this one here, and this is Cuphea lavia, and this is often called bat face plant because if you look right at the flower itself, it looks like it has a bat face. So these are the big ears, and then inside would be the face. Sometimes they're called mouse ears as well. But this is another great plant. It'll get also up to 2 to 3 feet high, and it'll be loaded with these beautiful flowers. Another one that's similar to that, this one is the Firefly. So it looks very similar to the bat face, but you can see it has a little bit different petal formation, as well as the colors, the flower colors are a little bit deeper red. Now again, these are great outdoor plants. You can grow them in containers, in your flower beds, amongst perennials because they provide that color all season long, and they can actually be grown indoors as well as a house plant. So if you wanted to, you could take them indoors during the winter months, and as long as you can keep them above, keep your home above 60 degrees, which most of us probably do, and be a little bit easy on the water. You don't want to water them too much. You want to actually kind of ease off and not water them very much during the winter months. And then you can plant them back outside again.
want to talk to you about a plant that you may or may not have in your garden, but regardless of whether you're a landscape gardener or a vegetable and culinary gardener, you want to add this plant because it's very versatile, and it is fennel. Now, fennel is a plant that is a short-lived perennial up to zone 7, but will continue to grow as an annual up to zones 4. Now, it tends to reseed, and you can see this one here actually is coming back from the original roots last year, but if we have a few here that are seedlings that we pulled up. It is in the Apiaceae family, which is also the carrot, dill, and parsley family, and so like those plants, you also have a long taproot. So sometimes transplanting this can be difficult because of the taproot, but if you were to divide this, you can usually get a good stand that you can separate and share with your neighbor or put somewhere else in your garden. When this plant is used in the landscape, oftentimes caterpillars will find it because it is fodder for those swallowtail butterflies in particular. So you might find that there's little round balls on the fern foliage, and those are the eggs of the butterflies. So if you maintain those and don't spray them or anything, then you'll find that those caterpillars will begin to hatch, and you'll see several stages of those caterpillars throughout those summer months, which also makes this plant a nice addition to children's garden to show them the life cycle of caterpillars. Now, as we know, butterfly caterpillars can eat a lot of food and often take down plants, but this bronze fennel will get anywhere from 3 to 4 to sometimes even 5 feet tall. And so you're still going to get plenty of this ferny foliage to add and soften that landscape. Now, although we often think of bronze fennel as either fodder for caterpillars or a nice texture to soften even the hardest of edges in the garden, also it's a good culinary plant, as everything above ground is edible. Now, when we're talking about culinary fennel, we often are thinking of the white bulbing fennel, such as what we have here. This particular one is actually an All-America selection, which is the first fennel to be recognized by the program. Now, on the white bulbing fennel, what really sets it apart, obviously we've got green foliage, but it does look similar to the bronze foliage other than the color. But down here you can see how it creates this swollen stem or this bulb, and this is what we harvest most often, while again all of the upper part of it is edible. So you can harvest the leaves throughout the season if you want to, but for this bulb you're going to want to harvest it earlier in the season, about the time that it starts to become a tennis ball size. If you want to harvest that, you can either pull it up out of the ground completely and then cut the taproot off, or you can simply take your knife and go right below that bulb. Now, by harvesting it this way, we're actually leaving that taproot in the ground. So we might find that we get some additional bulbs forming later on in the season that we can harvest. Now, they will be a little bit smaller, so don't expect something like this. Now again, you want to harvest this when it's about the size of a tennis ball. Waiting much longer, this will actually start to bolt, which means this vegetation will start to elongate and you'll lose that nice tight bulb structure that you're after. Again, if you're after the foliage, that's great. You can use it in the culinary aspect as well, or you might also wait for it to flower. It'll create this umbel or umbrella shaped flower similar to carrots and dill that are also in that plant family. And once those seeds start to dry, you can use those in the kitchen as well. Now, just like bronze fennel, which is a popular plant for our caterpillars, the caterpillars will be after this foliage as well. So be mindful of that you might see those eggs or those small different stages of the caterpillar growing on this plant as well. So while it's edible for humans, it's also edible for those caterpillars. So regardless of whether you're growing it in your ornamental landscape or in your kitchen garden, it's a great addition to any garden. Now, as for cooking this, Barb's got a great recipe for fennel.
Fennel is really a great choice for adding some variety to your meals. One of the nice things about it also is that the entire thing is usable. So this is one that was pulled out of the garden today, and you can see that there is some perhaps tougher areas here, and they're discolored. So those you'd probably want to pull off, and you would also want to remove that bottom part there. But the rest of it, depending on the age of it, is going to be usable in a dish. And I'm going to show you how we could cut one. This is one that came from a supermarket. It's a little bit smaller, but they hold up well in the supermarket also because, probably because they're misted so often. But we want to take the fronds off when you bring it home. But don't throw them away if there's any chance that you can go ahead and use them because you can use them like an herb. You can sprinkle a little bit of this on a salad. It's very often used just fresh. If you have a young one, you can also use the stems fairly fresh also, but often these need to be cooked, particularly on one that's a little bit older. It's got a little bit larger stems on it here. Those you'd want to take off, but they work really nice in a vegetable broth or a meat broth of some kind. So definitely worth keeping all of those if you can. When you get down to this, again, this one's already been cut fairly well, but I want to cut it again just to get that brown off, or most of it off. My goal here is to make a flat surface because anytime you're using a sharp knife, that should be one of the first things you try to do when you're working with an onion. You cut it in half, or you cut a base on it, or a tomato, you cut a little bit off the bottom so that it's not rolling around and you're less apt to hurt yourself is the gist of that. Now this part, what we're going to do at this point is simply cut the thing in half. And that way you can see, depending on the size of the core, what you want to do with the core is if it's tender enough, if you've got a young one, go ahead and eat it, or if you're cooking it, you may be able to work with it. But if you bite into it and it's kind of woody, then take the core out, just make a V cut and go from there. You can also, at this point, if you're going to be eating it raw, you look at the outside edge on this one is again a little bit tough, so you can just pull that off. If you want to, you can try cutting it off so that you don't lose the whole thing. But at this point, we're going to just discard that outer leaf. And then since we can eat this part raw, we just want to slice it really, really thin. And I've gone ahead and done that because we're going to make a salad today with fennel and grape. And if I have some of the fronds in it, that's going to be fine. I'm going to add those to the ones we already have ready to go. And we'll start from there. All right, as I said, it's fennel and grape. It's really easy to do. I've got a tablespoon of extra virgin olive oil and a tablespoon of either champagne vinegar or white wine vinegar or a vinegar you like really well that's not going to add a lot of color to the dish because the fennel and some of the other ingredients are very light and we don't want to add a lot of color from the vinegar, but just a vinegar that you like. I've also got 1/4 of a teaspoon of fennel seed, and this is also from the fennel. So again, all parts of the plant are edible as opposed to some other things like rhubarb where you've got to make sure you're not eating the leaves. That's not the case here. It has sort of a licorice taste with a celery texture. And I think you'll find that it's very nice. I'm going to add 1/4 of a teaspoon of black pepper and 1/4 of a teaspoon of kosher salt and whisk those together a little bit just to make a small bit of dressing. Now the nice thing about this is I'm not getting tons of extra bowls involved here. I'm going to make the dressing and then I'm going to add the ingredients directly to that. So we have the fennel that we have, that's about medium fennel bulb or a little bit more. And this one again, you can see here that there's the core. If you find that that is too crunchy, test it before you make the salad. If you find that it's too crunchy, go ahead and take it out, but if it's fine, leave it in there. I've got 1 1/4 cups of, or excuse me, 1 1/2 cups of thinly sliced celery, and then a mix that's about 2 1/2 cups of grapes, and I've used a mix of red and green because I thought it looked kind of pretty that way. I'm simply going to blend those together until everything gets coated, and you can see how easy this is. I find that it tastes a little bit nicer if you've got a little bit of time that you can let it set so that the flavors blend and so that the celery and the fennel get maybe a little bit softer, but you can make it up ahead of time, probably not too much ahead of time because you don't want that action happening to an extreme. And there you go. This one is really easy. We'll serve up a dish full. This makes anywhere from 4 to 6 servings. And the last thing I'm going to put on it is a little bit of, see if I can get a few more of those red grapes on the top, a little bit of Well, I wanted some green onion in it, so we'll sprinkle a little bit over the top since I miss getting it in it itself. And then also a little bit of toasted almond or other nut that you might have. Toasting it is easy to do, but the recipe will provide you the directions if you don't know how to do it. I hope you'll give it a try. Fennel's a little bit different than what we usually think of when we think of summer vegetables or vegetables in general. And this one's fennel and grapes. It's good for Oklahoma gardening. I'm Barbara Brown.
There are a lot of great horticulture activities this time of year. Be sure and consider some of these events in the weeks ahead. Next week on Oklahoma Gardening, July brings warmer, drier conditions and new things to be aware of in the landscape. We'll show you how to install something every garden needs. We visit a beautiful garden of daylilies, and I'll share with you 3 ways to save money while being environmentally friendly. To find out more information about show topics as well as recipes, videos, articles, fact sheets, and other resources, including a directory of local extension offices, be sure to visit our website at oklahomagardening.okstate.edu. And we always have great information, answers to questions, photos, and gardening discussion on your favorite social media as well. Join in on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. You can find this entire show and other recent shows as well as individual segments on our Oklahoma Gardening YouTube channel. Tune in to our OK Gardening Classics YouTube channel to watch segments from previous hosts. Oklahoma Gardening is produced by the Oklahoma Cooperative Extension Service as part of the Division of Agricultural Sciences and Natural Resources at Oklahoma State University. The Botanic Garden at OSU is home to our studio gardens, and we encourage you to come visit this beautiful Stillwater gem. We would like to thank our generous underwriter, the Oklahoma Department of Agriculture, Food, and Forestry. Additional support is also provided by Pond Pro Shops, Greenleaf Nursery and the Garden Debut Plants, the Oklahoma Horticultural Society, and Tulsa Garden Club.